Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time of the day, where in the world you joining us from. We are very excited to have two amazing guests with us today to walk us through and run us through what is changing in aviation. We all been looking keenly at the gazettes being changed, at the NOTAMs going out, and what it actually means for us as aviators, more especially on the general aviation side, as to what we are allowed to do. So, when can we fly? What can we fly? How far can we go? All of the questions we really want to know. My name is Franz Smith. I am the founder and MD of Pilot Insure. And we put these Rusty pilots together just to make sure that you guys are 100% up to date with what is going on in aviation and make sure, number one, that you guys are all safe. And we've got a whole series coming up and lined up. If you haven't seen our first Rusty Pilot event, please, before you go flying, you are on our channel right now. Just find the Rusty Pilot webinar. It's a lengthy one because we have incredible speakers on there talking about all kinds of safety things in aviation. I almost beg you to please go and watch it and just make sure that you are a little bit safer before you get back in the sky again. That's all it's about, guys. We're all friends, we're all a community, we're all in this together. And we definitely all want everyone to be safe so that we can continue enjoying our aviation and continue enjoying our sport of flying and our passion. So without me taking up too much time, on the call today, we've got two people, Neil DeLange, CAA, as well as Rob Jonkers from Aeroclub. And they're going to be talking to us firstly about what does it mean, what the new notice are going to look like, talk us a little bit about just generally what the Gazette said, what we're allowed to do, and then following Neil, we'll have Rob, which will actually tell us and explain to us a little bit more about practically what is it that we need to do before we go flying next. So without any further ado, this is what we've all been waiting for. Neil, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I definitely appreciate all the hard work you guys are putting in. I know the last few weeks have been an absolute challenge for you guys. Late nights, a lot of hours being put in, and a lot of wrestling to get us in the best position possible. Neil, thank you very much for joining us. We really look forward to what you have to say.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Franz. I appreciate that. And yes, you're spot on. There's been a lot of thinking and a lot of discussion and a lot of meeting that's gone into this point where we are now, where we can actually share some meaningful information with you. So without any further ado, let me just maybe kick off by saying that about a week ago, the Minister of Transport has had a speech and made some reference to certain forms of flying that will be opened up in phase 2 of level 3 of the lockdown. And so sorry about that. And what's happening is that we had to structure a way of implementing the directions that was issued by the minister subsequently on the 1st of July. So in order to give life and to give effect to what the minister has issued by way of direction, we have worked on the issuing of a NOTAM, which will give some guidance to the pilots in the training environment, in the general aviation space, and in the recreational aviation space. And this NOTAM will be published during the course of this afternoon. And this NOTAM also calls into life a guidance document, what we call a general notice, which will be published on the Civil Aviation Authority's website during the course of this afternoon. So the NOTAM, in very short terms, as far as this discussion is concerned, speaks to the aviation recreation operations and the general aviation operations, which are prohibited except for maintenance-related flights, which we've already dealt with, and then, of course, now the proficiency flights. This then takes us to a point 7 on this NOTAM, which will say the approvals for the operations defined needs to be obtained from the SACAA. So yes, we still need to give approvals for these flights. And please to consult the guidance material on the CAA website, and it gives the website address. So when we jump over to the guidance material, what we're seeing there is a notice with the name GAD for General Aviation Department 2020/003, which was the third one in the series. Basically guidance for general aviation and aviation recreation proficiency flights. So it's about a 3-pager, basically gives you a quick background to how we got to where we are, how this applies, and then what the process is that needs to be followed in order for you to get your application through for approval in this regard. And when I'm done with this, Rob is going to speak to you about the process that was developed, which is a fully automated process with incredibly quick turnaround times for people to get back into the air, to be proficient. And I think perhaps at this point in time, France, it's necessary for me to point out that this is still level 3, phase 2 of lockdown scenario. When we get to level 1 and when there's no further lockdown applicable, we want to make sure that the airplanes are safe, and we want to make sure that the pilots are safe. So this is focusing on the pilot aspect, speaking to the proficiency of these guys and how they can make sure that they are good for this purpose. So very quickly on the background, we've got 2 definitions in there just to say what is general aviation and what is recreation aviation. And these are definitions that come out of the civil aviation regulations, just so that everybody is on the same frequency. And I think I'm just going to read them quickly. General aviation operations means an aircraft operation other than a commercial air transport, air ambulance, or aerial work operation. And then recreation aviation speaks to flying microlight, glider, balloon, gyroplane, hang glider, paraglider, model aircraft, light sport aeroplane, touring motor gliders, and parachutes. And then if we go a little bit further on, we have included the portions that is contained in the minister's directions to put that into context. And I'm just highlighting short pieces. And I can tell you, Franz, this is as new as 11 o'clock this morning. So unfortunately, I can't put it in a slideshow to show you. So bear with me.
No, that's perfect. Thanks.
The general aviation is permitted for the following purposes. Then we say proficiency flights, provided that the flight is authorized by the South African Civil Aviation Authority and remains within the general flying area, airfield, or airport boundaries. That's a verbatim quote out of the directions issued by the minister. And then for purposes of these proficiency flights, and as it applies to general aviation aircraft, the application process in paragraph 4 below applies, which we'll speak to a little bit later. All aircraft airworthiness requirements and pilot licensing requirements must be valid and current at the time of the intended flight. And I can just pause here for a quick moment. There was a long discussion on an exemption, a general exemption that will be issued very shortly by the CAA that speaks to the validity of pilot licenses that may have lapsed during this time of lockdown. So keep your eyes peeled for that general exemption that should be issued later today as well. This flight needs to be VFR by day only. Arrival and departure aerodrome remains the same, and it's a single pilot or essential crew only, no passengers permitted. And this is in context of larger aircraft where essential crew is required, where you have a first officer together with a captain. Then on paragraph 2.3, it says recreational aviation, and I would imagine this is the bugbear, the way I read all of the comments that float around on social media. Recreational aviation is permitted for proficiency flights, provided that the flight is authorized by the South African Civil Aviation Authority and remains within the general flying area, airfield, or airport boundaries. In the case of model aircraft, the procedure as published by the SAMA and as applicable to the registered club contained in ENR 5.5 will apply. And then it goes on to paragraph A. For purposes of this, and as it applies to recreation aviation aircraft, the application process in 4 below applies, which same Rob's going to speak to that. All aircraft airworthiness requirements and pilot proficiency requirement or pilot licensing requirements must be met. VFR by day, arrival, departure, aerodrome, or site remains the same for the flight. And in the case of non-powered flights, the standard operating procedure will apply. And this would speak to, let's say, ballooning or paragliding or gliding, where your launch area and your eventual landing area is not necessarily the same. And it's a single pilot only, no passengers permitted. And then if we carry on a little bit further, it says for the purpose of the proficiency flights, above, the pilot may request that a nominated or current senior mentor pilot or instructor be permitted to accompany the applicant as a safety pilot in order to promote proficiency and safety during these flights. So you do get it where people haven't flown for a while, the licenses are still valid and so on. They wanted to take a senior pilot or mentor in a safety capacity along. So that would be allowed. General or recreational aviation operations other than those listed in the general notice or covered under the notice are not permitted. So if it's not listed here, it's not taking place. In the case of parachuting and hang gliding or paragliding, tandem operations are not permitted. Right, then we continue to say, just for clarity and for inclusiveness, that this notice applies in addition to the notices below. And then we just list a few of them there to say the general notice JAD 001, which speaks to maintenance related flights. These are still continuing. So the systems are still alive, and these flights and system engine health flights are still taking place, as well as General Notice 2, which speaks to the guidance for positioning flights. That is also still taking place, as well as flights covered by the Government Gazette earlier, 43375, inclusive of essential services and business flights. So we are concerning ourselves here only with those proficiency flights. And then, Frans, just lastly, the process to be followed, which will be explained by Rob, is available on the Aeroclub website as well as the CASA website. These are listed here as well. Once the form has been completed, the requester will be prompted to submit the relevant documentation and so on. The system will speak to you and lead you through all of that. And I think then very much at the end, and similar to the previous notices, adherence to the general aviation or the general COVID-19 regulations applies, which also speaks to social distancing, personal hygiene, and so forth. And then compliance with the civil aviation regulations will obviously apply. So the usual stuff that's in the cars that speak to these types of operations will apply, and that any transgression of those will result in the usual enforcement type processes. So I think in a nutshell, that puts it out there, and I'm sure that we can take some questions a little bit later, and we can respond to those. I know it's quite a mouthful, but I think that sets out the expectation. Over to you, Frans. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So, I mean, guys, it's important for us all to know that, you know, Neil's here to really answer our questions and you know, give us clarity. That's the reason why we're doing these things. You know, it is very difficult for us to come up with every single question. Yes, I've got a few questions that I will be asking Neil towards the end, but we really are here for you guys. So, you know, if you have a question, you're live with us right now, ask that question. We will definitely get to it. While I'm at it, you know, just like this video, subscribe to this channel so that you guys can get more feedback as it comes later, and also all the live updates we have. Neil, thank you very much. I think that's a good overview. I mean, even though it's more or less verbatim of what the rules say, I'm sure we can get into some questions, and I think you know more or less what 99% of the questions are going to be anyway. But we can definitely get into that questions and get some clarity. Thanks, Neil. Rob, so what we looking for now is just the process of we'll get into the questions and answer, you know, when, what, how, who can fly, etc., etc. But once we know that, what's the next step, Rob? How do we actually get this in play?
Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, maybe just some background on how we got to this point, because it's been a long road, for an entire month almost. We actually started in May to define what could be allowed at different levels of lockdown. And we obviously asked for more than what we eventually got. And just after level 3 started, there was a discussion about a level 3 phase 2, which didn't exist prior to that. And we produced an industry document, where we as Aeroclub and the CASA put in, I'd say, quite a list of what we would like to be able to do. Very much a emphasis on proficiency and losing of proficiency, as that would have made sense, to anybody who's listening about, yes, they just similar to the maintenance flights. Let's not break airplanes, and let's also at the same time not allow lapsing of proficiency or recency, with pilots. And I think we have been listened to, because that document was completed by mid-June. And in the background, between the CAA, that's Neil's team, and the Aeroclub, we started working on some way to figure out how to do an auto-authorized proficiency system. And we've been working since then to actually get it live, but we haven't been successful up until the day that the minister actually gave his speech, which was on Monday. And then the Gazette that was issued later than what the speech was. So we were all forced into a corner trying to, second guess, what that Gazette would eventually say, even though a lot of the background work already taking place, and what was going to be allowed or not was, being negotiated in the background. So eventually we have got to where Neil has just read out the general notice. That general notice is not available as yet, but it will be available later this afternoon, as will be the NOTAM, and as will be the system will also go live on the Aeroclub and CASA websites, which I'll just show you quickly how that looks like. So as Neil says, there will be a link, and then you can go to the Aeroclub or CASA websites, and in there you'll be able to apply, or rather register for your flights. And it's automated. It's really a filling in of a form, and then when you hit submit, within a few, probably about 10 seconds or so, depending on your server location, you'll get an email that authorizes you to go fly. So I'm just going to switch my screen sharing on so you can see how that all works. And as I say, it's not fully complete, because as Neil also said, there were a lot of changes and information that needed to be finalized this morning still. I only got sight of the draft an hour before this call. So I'm still working on in the background to complete this, but it should be live by later this afternoon. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just confirm you can see my screen. Frans, can you confirm you see my screen now?
100%, Rob.
Okay, all right. So this is the Aeroclub website. Those who are familiar with their website, you will see that there are tabs. There's the maintenance rated flights, engine preservation protocol, maintenance repositioning flight, and there's a blank over here because it's not live yet. And this is called proficiency, or rather recency flight requests. Because proficiency reads to, if you're not proficient, go and get an instructor to get you proficient again. But the word proficiency has been used in a general context, but what we are trying to do here is more in the line of recency. So there's the text here that describes what is this all about, what is the process to be followed, where does it come from. That's the document that will be issued later this afternoon, which will have today's date on it. And what is also important is that the whole purpose of the constraints that we are still under is to ensure that the spread of the virus is contained. So the protocols that you agree to must be complied with. So in this regard, proficiency flying will only be allowed to take place from a single airfield or base. So there's no destinations other than the same airfield or base of operations you departed from. If you want to do outlandings such as touch and goes, you can do that, or you can land and taxi back up to the holding point and take off again. So those kinds of things will be allowed. So there will be applications for various of our recreational disciplines and GA aircraft. I've just got separated here: type certified, non-type certified, gliders, hang gliding, paragliding, powered paragliding, because that's all in one discipline. There's ballooning and there's parachuting. And for model flying, you go to the SAMA website. So any one of these, because they all have a bit of a different protocol to follow, but all of our recreational disciplines and our Aeroclub sections are covered within these applications. Okay, so if we go to what the application looks like, this is what an application looks like in this case for powered flight. This is the one that I've more or less finished. You will receive an email after submitting, which will allow you to do any number of flights for the next 7 days. So you can get in your airplane and fly any number of flights as you like for the next 7 days from your home base. And it just gives you some, call it more text to take note of. And if you want to reapply after the 7 days is up, you just reapply and then just registers a new application for the next 7 days. And you can keep on going with this as long as you like. The whole point of the 7 day period is that, if there are COVID outbreaks, we need to have a register of who was where and when. And that's all that is. If we leave it open for a long time, we can't home in on, or the authorities can't home in on who was at the airfield, within a certain period. So it's got nothing to do with, an approval for, to limit a period. It's more about when were you at the airfield at what time. It just gives you requirement for your email address, surname, name, all your good things, cell number, license number, aircraft type, registration, what location. And then what's to be done is that you need to just declare that you are going to be COVID-19 compliant. You have to have your, normally like you are driving out of your house every day, you need to have sanitizer, you need to have masks, you need to have gloves, and also you need to clean your aircraft. Now, these two are more related to the fact that you may be sharing an aircraft with somebody else. If you are partners or owners that you need to share with. So that's really all why that is there, which is a bit different to when you're operating your car. Then you declare that you're going to do all these measures, and then you just submit. You'll receive this confirmation that says that you will receive an email, and I'm just going to switch my sharing to an email. So first of all, you will receive an email confirmation of the form that you filled in, and there's a form that's been filled in. Say that you've now done all that. Just going to stop sharing, and the other form that you will receive, or email that you will receive, is this approval. You will say you'll get an approval that says that you're allowed to carry out this proficiency flight that's granted to name, your registration, that you have ticked the comply on each one of these questions, and you will then agree to the terms of this flight, and it is approved by peer, with the CAA's logo at the bottom. So that's basically the the process. I think what I would just like to also show is there is a register. I just want to share the Google screen again. There we go. So there is a register that will be kept of everybody's call it activity, and this register is available to the CAA to find out who was where and when at any particular time. Which has got a date and timestamp, and then all the details of person and aircraft involved. So that's basically what I can say of what's to be done, and we are aiming to see if we can get this live by about 4 o'clock or so this afternoon. I will also send out a general MailChimp, which comes from the Aeroclub MailChimp system that explains all of this in any case. So you will have already had some preview of that from this discussion. So essentially, we should be ready that everybody can operate and fly this weekend, in accordance with these new requirements. Okay, I think that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, so I mean that's good. I mean that gives us it tells us exactly what we need to do. Where we need to go. Where would we be able to find those links, Rob, to click on to do this?
As I showed you, it's not visible as yet, but I can just show it to you again. Just want to go back to share screen. You will find it on the Aeroclub website. Where my cursor is now is a blank block. And you'll find it there. It will be called Proficiency in brackets Recency Flight Request. The title that you see here will appear in this block over here. And it will be similar on the CASA website. It will be exactly the same. The text and the links will be identical. It's just we've provided two avenues for people to go to. Because in this case, the Aeroclub and CASA are in partnership with each other to support each other in these in terms of these the flight protocols. And it's also listed like that in the general notice that will be released later.
Okay, brilliant. I just wanted to make sure that we all know where to find it later this afternoon. Okay, so I think, Rob, thank you very much for that explanation. Neil, thank you for running through it with us. So I've got one or two just general questions that I'd like to ask you guys, if you would entertain me. And then after that, we could quickly go. We had a couple of questions coming through on the stream as well. So, guys, just in a nutshell, and I mean, this is maybe a bit of a selfish question, but I'm sure there'll be many guys on here who want to know this. So, for someone like myself that's quite involved with competitive flying, with all the speed rallies and nav rallies and all these amazing events that we have here in South Africa, would it be possible for me to actually practice that with my navigator as far as proficiency goes? In my opinion, and of course I could be wrong, but in my opinion, that absolutely talks to your proficiency as a pilot and in your sport. Or am I missing the mark?
Yeah, maybe that's something that Neil can answer. There is text in the general notice that maybe Neil you can perhaps just read out that will cover this.
Right. Thanks, Rob and Frans. What it says here is that it's a single pilot only operation, no passengers permitted, and then there is a rider to that a senior or mentor pilot or instructor could be permitted to accompany the applicant as a safety pilot. So I don't know if the flying in a contest scenario or in a rally scenario, if that will pass the test. From what I read here is, I think those things would probably be dealt with at a lower level. But having said that, it could also possibly be that in certain circumstances, certain of these things can overlap. So obviously we haven't tested that, but if I read this just as it says here, single pilot only other than for a safety related scenario, and if it's training related, then obviously under an approved aviation training organization, which is a separate issue. So at this stage, those sort of things will not be allowed. So the matter of contesting and so forth will not be covered by this notice.
Okay, so I mean, I'm obviously not saying that we hold a rally. You know, I mean, I just want to make sure that you just clear my question. I'm not saying let's hold a rally or let's hold an event yet. My question is really just for proficiency of that unit, you know, because obviously when you do these kinds of rallies and events, and there are stresses and pressures, and it really is, you know, a multi-crew environment. So my question is really just if we can just test it, you know, and ask the question, just because a little bit of logic tells me that, you know, somewhere in there we do talk about a multi-crew scenario, and I know you alluded to obviously the bigger machines, and that was the idea and the theory behind it, but it would be interesting for us to test, at least test the question, right? At least ask the question.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what we need to just be mindful of is that we are not in a level 1 scenario yet. This let's say not concession, but this direction that was issued by the minister really wants to make sure that pilots are safe when normal, if we can call it ever normal again, normal flying resumes. So we've dealt with the aircraft, as I've mentioned earlier. Now we're dealing with the pilots. I think what we're talking about now is perhaps a next level or a next step from here. But obviously one can have a closer look at that. And then, you know, perhaps just clarify that.
Okay, perfect. No, thanks, Neil. I just wanted to point that out. You know, this is, for all of us, this is so brand new. I mean, like you said, you know, you guys just got out of this meeting an hour ago. So there will be many questions and many things that, you know, I appreciate we won't have immediate answers to. But, you know, thanks for at least taking our questions, Neil. It really is appreciated. Okay, so I think if you guys don't mind, I know we played with the idea of having a quick break. How are you guys feeling of jumping into the questions quickly and getting it done? Or would you need to take a 2-minute breather?
No, we're good, thanks.
Yeah, happy to go along.
Okay. So we've taken, guys, ask your questions while we're doing this. We might add 1 or 2 to them as well. Okay. So with us, we've got David Leroux. David Leroux is our new business manager at Pilot Insure. David was running through and managing the questions for us as they came up. I am going to invite David Leroux to actually join us. David, it would be great if you could go through the questions with Rob and Neil, please, and if you could, you know, get those questions answered, but none of the difficult ones, David, just the easy ones.
Just the nice easy ones that make us all look good, for sure. Hi, everyone, and yeah, thanks again, Neil and Rob, for helping us out here. We have a question, and I think it's already been answered, but a question from Anton Folks. Can you take a passenger along on such a recency or proficiency flight? Is that a possibility? And I would think that would go to Neil.
Thanks for that, David. Short answer, no, you can't do that. The flights are, let me just get that exact wording for you. The flights are single pilot only, no passengers.
Okay, but only if but there are concessions for safety pilots and essential crew. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So as I pointed out, if you do sometimes get people that are not quite comfortable, having not flown for a while, wanting just to make double sure that they are greased and ready and safe and comfortable to do the flight, and then they want to do a circuit or two with an instructor or a safety pilot, and so for that purpose, we've agreed with that.
Okay. Thanks very much, Neil. And then a question from Sandy Goddard is just regarding the parachuting and other so-called recreational aviation. Why there seems to be no restrictions there, and she would just like to know why. Let me read her exact question. Why are there no restrictions to parachuting and on all other so-called recreational aviation that in the first place is now anywhere in the ANR or not anywhere in the ANR?
I'm not sure I got that right. It deals with parachute-related flights and limitations. The limitation on parachuting is that the same with paragliding, that no tandem operations are permitted at this time, and obviously for the obvious reasons of distancing and so forth. So hopefully I got that right. Was that the question?
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, I think what Sandy is referring to, ANR means air navigation race. I think in her context, that's her question. It's really a nav rally. So I think her question is more, okay, if parachutes are allowed to operate, why can't we hold a navigation rally in the same context, where there's crew? That's really, I think, the question.
Thanks, Rob, for clarifying that. ANRs have meant many things to different people, but the short of that is that they want to limit the exposure of people. If you do fly with someone in the cockpit in a training environment or in a mentorship environment, there's all sorts of additional requirements as far as masks and shields and the like is concerned, and sanitizing the aircraft after the flights and everything that relates to that. The authority has considered all of this and said, well, for purposes of keeping pilots' licenses valid and for purposes of making sure that we keep the system working, aviation training organizations are allowed to continue with their operations. And in the same vein, that was extended to include a mentor or a safety pilot in certain circumstances, but not to open it up because where do you draw the line? As I said, we're in this level 3, and that was the sort of the level of the discussions that were taking place. But if you allow this, then why not that? And if you allow that, then why not the next thing? And that's how the creep is taking place. And this is where, for want of a better expression, the peg was put in the sand to say, we will allow this because this is a reasonable request. So passengers are not allowed, and that's how I think they've read the second person in the cockpit requirement for those rallies that you're talking about.
Gotcha. Okay, and in terms of a safety or senior pilot, is there a clear guideline what that definition is? A question from Let's Go Aviate: what classifies as a safety or senior pilot?
Okay, that's a good question. What we basically said is originally only an instructor, only in the training environment, and then we extended and said, but in some instances, there are instructors around that can fly with certain pilots, but not within the ambit of an aviation training organization as such. And in some instances, you have senior pilots in a mentorship capacity that can do that. And that is a pretty gray area. It's going to be very tough to motivate your grandmother or 7-year-old kid as being a mentor pilot or an instructor or a senior pilot. So obviously there is a bit of leeway in that, but that goes down to how the various clubs function and how they are guided by their various organizations in the appointment of these persons. So again, you can't narrow it too much down, otherwise you'll have to fall back onto only the ATO environment. But you'll have to be able to explain why the person is deemed to be the safety pilot. And I think I can just leave it at that for now. Otherwise, you get into a whole discussion as to, is 200 hours enough? Is 2,000 hours sufficient? Is it somebody that's not rated on type? Is it somebody that's rated on type? So eventually you end up in circles around that. So the purpose of that is the allowance for somebody that might be able to assist where an ATO or an instructor may not be available. I hope that.
Thanks, Neil. I think common sense and logic can prevail there. I don't think we need to be bogging it down on specific hours and types. I think that'll maybe overcomplicate things.
Okay. There are a couple of more questions, but I think most of them have been answered, and a lot of them are just straightforward comments as well. But there seems to be a question from Janine Laughlin. Do you foresee this changing in the near future to allow more freedom of flight?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. As we are now sitting in this level 3.2, I think the expectation generally is that we will move towards lower levels. Hopefully, we move to level 2 from here, and then hopefully to level 1 from there. And as we move along, more and more of these flight restrictions will fall away. And as the Department of Health is getting a grip on the development and the spread of this nasty virus that we're experiencing globally. It could also be, and it's actually an opportune moment to mention that it might happen that we move back up to level 4. There's been talk of that in some areas. There's been some hotspots. There's been some concerns expressed by the powers that be. And if that happens, then obviously this rule will also fall away, and we will revert back to what we had in level 4, for instance. Also, that hasn't been tested, so we don't quite know how that will work. But if an essential service flight was allowed to be conducted under level 5, and certainly some were allowed to be conducted under level 5 with the necessary permissions from corporate governance, traditional affairs, the Department of Transport, the CIPC, who's issued essential services certificates and that sort of thing, we may fall back to that. Hopefully that does not happen. So yes, we definitely foresee going south insofar as the numbering is concerned, and to relax this more and more. But it is a fluid, it is a dynamic situation we find ourselves in. Thanks, David.
Gotcha.
I think it's important to mention that with time and everything going on, we all have noticed from where it was a complete shutdown and lockdown, we've definitely noticed many steps in the right direction. Guys, I think we just need to, I know everyone is frustrated. Everyone wants to get back in the air and just continue with life and go as per normal. I think the reality is that, that simply won't be possible for where we are. But we definitely do see the good and strides being made in that direction. And just as a very good example, I mean, now we're sitting at a point where you can go fly your machine. I mean, that's the bottom line. You can get yourself safe, and you can get yourself proficient. And you can go to the general flying area and practice your stalls and spins and etc. So you can get your skills sharpened. I mean, I think that's the main point and the main driving factor for most of us in the last couple of weeks, is just to get that done, and that's exactly what has happened. I know everyone wants to jump in the aircraft, go as per normal, and just on that point, guys, if I can also just ask more like a logical thinking question. So I get in my aircraft and I go, let's use an example, and let's say I'm at Vodderboom and I go into the, fly towards the general flying area, and I do a couple of touch and goes at Brits and fly back and land and put my airfield in the hangar. Nothing wrong with that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Rob, maybe you know the area of it better.
Rob, will you be able to answer that question?
Yeah, sorry, you'll just have to repeat that. I was just disturbed by a telephone, yeah.
Okay, no problem. No problem. So the question is, as an example, I'm a PPL GA pilot. I own an aircraft. I get in my aircraft at Vodderboom, go to, for a proficiency flight, do a few touch and goes at Brits, come back, put my airfield in the hangar. No problem with that.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
You can exactly that.
Okay. And if obviously I want to go into the general flying area, which happens to be pretty close to the dam, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
Okay. So guys, the way I see it is, yes, there are restrictions on not being able to, take your family with you. And yes, there are restrictions in terms of only being allowed to have, in inverted commas, a safety pilot with you. But I must just say that this is a massive step in the right direction. This is amazing compared to where we were even a week ago, where the only way you could fly was just if you're worried about your aircraft. And I think it's also important to note, and Rob, maybe you can help me right here, but has the proficiency flights or the maintenance flights of aircraft, I mean, is that something that's fallen by the wayside? I suppose you don't really need that anymore.
Yeah, so I think what will happen is once we get this up and running, I think the continuous airworthiness call a system we've been running is probably superfluous, because you can fly for maintenance and for recency as you like. There'll be no restrictions, so that will probably fall away, because that is still a cumbersome process. You have to upload documents and all of that. But it will not fall away for the repositioning flights if you need to reposition your aircraft for maintenance.
Yes, and I mean, my logic tells me the reason is because that repositioning flight could be, from Cape Town to Joburg.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, brilliant. Dave, do you have a couple more questions you want to quickly throw in?
There's one definite one I want to ask, and it seems quite pertinent, from Graham Lucknow. He asks, must the safety or mentor pilot make their own application, or is that included in the original application made by the pilot?
No, he doesn't. It's only the pilot that needs to make the application. The mentor pilot or whoever goes with can just be asked to join.
Perfect. So there's your answer there, Graham. And one more question and then a comment after this. Question from Bart van den Berg. If you have an approved flight plan and CAA approved, if you have an approved flight plan and a CAA approved COVID-19 procedure, is the flight legal?
Yes, it is. If it is part of if it's on that COVID compliance form that you complete as a business flight.
Okay, fantastic. There's your answer there. And then I think just there is a general consensus of thanks and effort to everyone, especially you, Rob and Neil, just all your effort on getting us as far as we can. And yeah, let's hope that we can get back up in the air as safely as possible and as soon as possible.
Yeah, Rob, Neil, thanks again for your time, guys. I know it was a bit last minute with all the changes happening on the back end, and I appreciate it, and I understand how really hard you guys are working to get us all, to get us all safely in the air. I know we've been talking pretty much from day one, and that's been my biggest fear. Is that the guys not being proficient, and that obviously leading to incidents and accidents later on. Guys, again, before we end this, please go and have a look at our previous video. It is based as a safety evening. Rob and Neil's on there as well. We have a bunch of other speakers that really talk about safety. Please go and have a look at that before you go flying and jumping in your aircraft. There's a lot of tips and tricks in there that will keep you safer. And who knows, it might actually really, really save your life. Just something someone mentioned. Rob, Neil, thank you very much. I can't thank you guys enough for being willing to step forward and take questions head on and deal with this with us. We really all in this together, and we see all the questions, guys. We see all the frustration, we see, and we all share them. The things about, but what about taxis and whatever? We all, more or less are torn between thinking that on the one hand, and on the other end going, but this is something completely different. Neil, did you want to jump in there?
Just a quick one, Franz, before we sign off, just to come back to what Rob said about it's one application when you take a safety or mentor or pilot along, but the detail of that person must just be registered along the pilot detail. And I just wanted to make a closing remark as well when we get to that point. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, gentlemen, I'm ready to call it. Dave, unless there are any sneaky questions coming up, thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Please share this. We try to keep it nice and short so that more people can see it. I think we've got real answers. I'm pretty convinced that the questions were answered, and we know what we can do quite safely. So please, guys, go out there, get yourself safe, get yourself proficient. If you're unsure and you haven't flown in a while, please take a senior pilot with you. You are allowed to do this. We discussed it. Maybe take someone that, in my opinion, is very proficient or has flown, in the last month or so. Just someone that's a bit more experienced, and make sure that you are safe. Take an instructor, whatever it is. The couple of $100 it's going to cost you extra is nothing compared to getting yourself into a position that you can't get yourself out of. Just lastly, again, Neil, Rob, thank you so much, guys. We really appreciate all your effort up. I know we all really appreciate it. These are frustrating times, guys, but we are moving in the right direction. And we definitely getting to more flying, getting into the air more. So, go out there this weekend, have fun, be super safe. And I'm sure we will be communicated once all the links and everything goes live from Rob's side. Thank you very much, guys. That's us signing off. Until next time, remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Do it. You want to. Cheers.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.